Our moderator for today's session is Dr. Mark Heidel. He's the Director of Bands in the School of Music at the University of Iowa. He conducts the Iowa Symphony Band, teaches graduate courses in conducting and wind band literature, guides the graduate band conducting program, and oversees the University of Iowa band program. Prior to his appointment at Iowa in 2008, Dr. Heidel served as Director of Bands at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, Shippensburg State University of Pennsylvania, as a teaching assistant in the School of Music at Illinois, and taught for 9 years in the state of Texas. The session today is part of a series featuring legends of the Big Ten and a panel discussion with emeritus faculty from Big Ten institutions. This year's session features Kenneth Bloomquist from Michigan State University, Jim Keene from the University of Illinois, and H. Robert Reynolds from the University of Michigan. Please welcome Dr. Mark Heidel, who will further introduce today's panel and lead our discussion in this afternoon's event. Please.
Thank you very much, Pete. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Last year at this time, Jay Gebhardt from Purdue University moderated the first installment of the Legends of the Big Ten, which was sponsored by the Big Ten Band Directors Association. That session featured Ray Kramer, Myron Welch, and John Whitwell. Regrettably, Al Wright was unable to participate in that session last year. This year, I have the distinct honor of moderating Legends of the Big Ten Part 2, featuring Kenneth Bloomquist, Director of Bands Emeritus at Michigan State University, James Keene, Director of Bands Emeritus at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and H. Robert Reynolds, Director of Bands Emeritus at the University of Michigan. In an effort to utilize as much of our time together as possible, I'm not going to read the clinicians' biographical information, but I strongly encourage you to read about each of these gentlemen's distinguished careers on pages 107 and 109 of the Midwest program. Upon reading about their careers, it will be quickly obvious that they are indeed legends of the Big Ten. So to begin, gentlemen, we'll start with Mr. Bloomquist. Who were your mentors and major influences?
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here on this podium here with my distinguished colleagues on my right and certainly on my left. It's an honor. As being a legend means just one thing to me: I'm really old. My mentors in the beginning, I was very fortunate to have very good public school teachers. One of them in particular was a man some of you may know. His name was John E. Green. John was distinguished faculty member at a couple of universities and is now retired. Well, he's actually passed away now. But anyway, for me, I was a graduate of the University of Illinois. I did all my degree work at the University of Illinois, and I started my freshman year in 1949. And my first director of bands at the University of Illinois was a guy named Albert Austin Harding. And that's a name that some of you, hopefully lots of you know, but he was sort of an icon in the band world at that particular time. I had the chance to know him a little better than most freshman students because I was given the job of being one of the two band librarians at the University of Illinois. So I got to see Dr. Harding really on a daily basis. We became close enough, so he always called me Kenny, and I can remember one incident early on in my career when he was telling me what to do and so forth and so on. We were, of course, all involved in the marching band at that time, and of course Dr. Harding was too, and I noticed in the marching band, which was huge, it had 175 members, and I noticed there was only one piccolo in this band. Now, we had piccolos and flutes coming out of the ears at Illinois, but there was only one in the marching band. And one day I had the courage to ask Dr. Harding, I said, Dr. Harding, why do we have only one piccolo in the marching band? And I can remember his answer as if it were yesterday. He said, well, Kenny, I don't care if we have 75, 175, or 1,175. One piccolo is enough. And I've never forgotten forgot it because it was true. Mr. Hinesley, Mark H. Hinesley, was the heir apparent and actually took over the director of band's position in my freshman year when he became the director of bands. And I worked for him for basically all of my time at the University of Illinois. So he was certainly one of my primary mentors, and certainly very influential in how I ran my life. The other person in this particular period of time in the undergraduate area was a guy named Charles Brendler. You know that name? Charles Brendler was the University of the United States Navy band conductor in Washington, D.C. I got to know him simply because he was a guest conductor at the University of Illinois in those early years, and he became the person I definitely wanted to be with, and I decided to audition for the United States Navy Band when my time came to graduate, which I did. And I went out to Washington and auditioned for Commander Brendler, and I was good enough to get in, but they didn't have an opening for any trumpets or cornets at that time until it was something close to a year later. And so anyway, I was disappointed, and I went back, got my degree, and immediately got drafted into the Army. But anyway, I always remembered because when I got my draft notice, I called Commander Brendler, and I said, I told him what had happened, and Commander Brendler said, "Kenny, have you opened it?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Have you opened it neatly?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Can you seal it again, and so it doesn't look like it's ever been opened?" And I said, "No, sir, I just tore the end off the envelope." And he said, "Kenny, there's nothing I can do for you." And hung up. And it was fun because at the end of my 2-year Army stint, Commander Brendler wrote me a letter and said, "According to my records, you are about to be released from the United States Army, and I want you to know we have a place for you in the Navy Band." And I promptly tore the letter up because I wanted nothing to do with the military anymore. But anyway, he turned out to be a very good friend, and we became acquaintances through the years. You have, of course, read the propaganda on us in the book you got. Yeah. But as you know, I went through. You'll find out, I went to the service for 2 years. I was a trumpet player and a fairly decent one, and I got eventually to be the acting band leader because the band leader, the warrant officer of the 6th Armored Division Band, got sent to Korea. So I became the acting band leader as a corporal, and finished my career there in the Army after 2 years. And I went back to the University of Illinois, and with Mr. Hinesley, I became the grad assistant in trumpet for the School of Music and a grad assistant in the bands for bands. So I had the best of both worlds in that area, and the area in which I did that for 2 years, and I then went to a public school job, which was a very, very good one for me. I learned a lot. I was only in the public school situation 1 year at Taylorville, Illinois, but it was a wonderful job, and I learned a lot. And I was then asked to audition for the professor of trumpet at the University of Kansas and assistant director of bands. I did, and I was offered the job and took it. I was only 26 years old, so it was a little young, but it worked out very well, and I was very happy, and I loved the University of Kansas. I think what I'll do is stop there and wait for some questions to go beyond that, because I can just carry on forever here. So thank you for the beginning. And
Okay, well, my mentors were the people that I would credit most. And in essence, when we think of mentors, we not only think of the people who shaped our professional growth and development growth, but inevitably we think back with a great deal of love to all those mentors and a great deal of appreciation. And my major mentors while attending the University of Michigan were, and I think we shared a couple of the same mentors in any case, were Larry Teal and Elizabeth Green and Dr. William D. Ravelli. And Larry Teal was an interesting person. He taught you a lot about life in addition to a lot about music and musical instrument, because he had done just about everything. He had toured with some of the dance bands, some of the great swing bands and dance bands of the 30s. He had was bored from that and played for many years as a member of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, and where he played extra flute, played bass clarinet. When they had saxophone, he did saxophone work. He taught, he continued to do that. He was important for many, many reasons, in that he was interested in every student as an individual. And so often we learn from people that taught us so much and influenced as a group and within an ensemble and as part of an ensemble, but someone who would spend a great deal of time one-on-one. And the other thing that he taught me is he followed through with his students. He knew what every one of those students, what every one of his ex-students was doing. He could tell you where every ex-student was. It was absolutely amazing, the memory that he had for that. He told you their personal traits, what their families were doing. He was very interested in their happiness and what they were doing. So he taught about the individual. Now, what those three individuals had in common, they were about, I would say, both of you knew these folks, I would say that from a personality standpoint, they were about as different, about as diverse as three different personalities could possibly be. But they had something in common, and that was a passion for music and a passion for teaching and a standard of excellence. Elizabeth Green was and continues to this day to be the most dedicated teacher I have ever known and ever been around. And she was so dedicated to her students and to her students, again, individually and as a group. She was interested in learning about her craft. And I mean, she spent so much time with Ivan Galami and teaching string methods or learning about string methods and string techniques, and you know, conducting from Malco and the time that she spent. And in both cases, the interesting thing is basically she wrote books for both of those people, and she wrote the books, but she didn't want the credit. Her credit is somewhere in the acknowledgement. Malco's name is on his book that she wrote. Galamian's name was on his book that she wrote. She didn't want the credit. She wanted the results. And she wanted their teachings to be brought out. She wanted their teachings shared. And if she had to be the one to do it, she was going to do it. And she was that way with her students. She was not just interested in presenting you with the subject matter. She was interested in making sure that you learned that. And she did it with love, and she did it with care. And that day, she was so dedicated. One thing that they didn't find out until she retired from Michigan, you know, you just assumed, when you took conducting classes from her, there would always be an orchestra there. There would always be somebody in front of you that you could conduct, that you could play. And what we found out, and they were being paid, it was a minimal amount, but she could get the students there and they were being paid. Well, nobody stopped to think about where that money came from. That money all came from Elizabeth Green's account, her personal checking account. And one of the things that she did after she had retired is she set up, I guess it was an endowment of sorts, to pay for students for those conducting classes. And one of the things that stood out that says it all about Elizabeth Green and continued growth and lifelong learning. I was in Ann Arbor after she had retired, and you know, whenever I was in town, the one person that I always wanted to see was Elizabeth Green, and I tried to get a hold of her. And we had to arrange, it was very difficult to arrange time with her, because although she was in her 80s, in her early 80s, and she was retired, She was enrolled as a student down the road at Eastern Michigan University because she always wanted to study art. She was very interested in painting and art. So she was an undergrad art major at Eastern Michigan University. And with Ravelli, of course, there was that great passion for music. Passion that was he never let up. That passion for being relentless. It doesn't matter if you have someone, if you tell someone 100 times, maybe they needed 101. Of course, Ravelli, one of his many, many sayings was, the teacher's responsibility does not end with the telling of, it ends with the doing of. And that passion for making music making, and of course that quest for perfection. So those are people who I will always be indebted to and indebted.
Well, you're going to hear some of the same comments because we both went to the same school. But my first mentor meant a lot to me was my high school mentor, Paul. And we didn't have all that great of a help, but he was a very good musician and a very good teacher, and again, cared about the individual. So later, as we were preparing concerts and so forth, he'd ask if anybody wanted to conduct a band on a piece. I always did, and nobody else seemed to want to, so I did. The next week he'd ask if somebody wanted to conduct, and I did again, I did again, and he started helping. Just do this better, or this with your left hand, or this with the baton, or whatever. And so I conducted quite a bit as a high school student. And it was great. I knew I wanted to be a conductor, even though I could play the French horn. And so when I went to Michigan, that's a whole other story in itself. I went to Michigan by accident. The shortcut version of going to Michigan was I went to Michigan to learn how to be a band director. And when I arrived in Michigan, I didn't know who the band director of Michigan was. Later on, I learned who the Michigan band director was. You might have heard nothing from Elizabeth Green. If you ask anybody, including Jim, and anybody who went to Michigan during that period, who was the greatest teacher I ever had, immediately everybody would say Elizabeth Green. I said, well, okay, who was the next best teacher? Then there'd be a pause, and, well, we had a lot of really good teachers. Let me think about that for a minute. But there was no thinking about who was the very best. And everything he said about her is absolutely true. Her dedication and her ability to, I'll just tell you one story. I've told this story before, so some of you have heard it before, but it's meaningful to me. Because we would get these assignments in first semester conducting, and because I've done this all through high school, I could just do it. And other people were having a hard time, but I could just get up and do it. So she'd give these assignments that I wouldn't prepare, and I'd just get up and do it. I could do it pretty well, because of my mentor, Paul Englefield. And one day she said, Robert, I know what you're capable of, and don't ever stand up here prepared like that again. And I haven't. She's still that voice in my ear. I'll get to Ravelli in a minute, but regarding what Ken said about one of his early mentors, John Green, hired me in my first college job at Long Beach State. He was director of bands, and then later had been made chairman of the music department, so they were going to hire an assistant. And as luck would have it, I was the one he hired. And he was a great mentor to me. I learned how to treat assistants because of the way John Green treated me. With respect and help, in every way he was a gentleman. He had one remarkable ability that I've never seen before or since. There was a big collection of students that happened in the fall when we all got together to form the marching band, and the whole room was filled with people. I don't know, a couple hundred people in the room to be in the marching band, and half or a quarter of them were freshmen, or a third of them were freshmen. He went around the room and named every person by name and what school they came from. I can't do that. I could never do that. But he could. He did a lot of things really well. Then he went to West Texas as chairman, And unfortunately, so I saw him several times before he died about the last few years. Brings me to Ravelli. I had as I look at it, the good or bad fortune to follow Ravelli in the job at Michigan. Not directly, there was an interim. George Cavender, who was Ravelli's assistant for 19 years, was director of bands for 4 years after Ravelli retired. And then I became the director of bands after George Cavender. And I learned from Ravelli what standards were. And I thought I could play really well. I was first chair in the all-speed things in high school, and and so on. And I came to school as a freshman and auditioned for the band, and I thought I played pretty well. And as I was walking down State Street to the rehearsal hall to find out where I ended up in the ensemble, I didn't expect to be first chair right away, but and people were congratulating me. I thought, well, maybe I am first chair. I went down, I looked at the board to find my name. There were 8 French horns in the symphony band. I was 8th. They were congratulating me because I had made the band as a freshman. Then I showed up for the first rehearsal, and I had never heard playing like that in my life. Against like Gulliver's Travels. I was this big fish in this high school pond in Sudbury at the University of Michigan. And he rehearsed 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And rehearsals were intense. I remember one time we were doing Chicago Fugue, which was one of Ravelli's most favorite pieces. And as you all know, he goes, "Biddling," and the horn part just goes, "boom," the first note. Well, he conducted the first note, and out from somewhere in the horn section came, stops, which was typical of him. He went down the line, started the first year. I was sitting now, it was like my second year, so I was like 6 instead of 8. So I started the first year, went, boom, second chair, third, got the man, I went, boom, said, move up to second chair. Well, I was no more the second best player in that section, I could fly. So a few rehearsals later, I was back up. But I used to sit in rehearsals and try to figure out what he was going to stop for and why and how he was going to address it. I learned a lot just by trying to predict. Sometimes I could, sometimes I couldn't. There are a lot of side stories that I will not, there's not time enough in the entire convention to go through all the side stories. But I'll just say to all of you who did not know Ravelli at all, everything you've heard about William Ravelli is true. And that's about it.
Thank you. Now, please highlight some aspect or aspects of your career that people might not know about or that they would find interesting. And I'd like to start with Mr. Keene.
Well, you said, I'm not sure I can tell some of the most interesting things. You said that you wanted something amusing on this thing. Well, I can tell you a lot of amusing, but again, I'm not sure I want to tell you some of the amusing things. I can tell you, I was just thinking about it because I ran into a student earlier today that was an incident that happened here at convention. You know, sometimes you have these little victories and you get promoted to this and you get promoted to that, and you get an office here and you get to be the grand poobah of some organization. And it was here at this convention, and I had just come off as was going to become the immediate past president of the National Band Association. And I'd been president, and one of the things that we had done during that time is they have a wonderful award that they do, which is the AWAPA Award, the Academy of Wind and Percussion Arts. And we decided to expand and go into publication, recognition. And at that time, it was very, very difficult. It had been very difficult to get grade 5 and 6 music, to get music that one would consider art music, to get the publishers to get serious about it, because they wanted to publish the music where they were going to make a lot of money. They were going to make a lot of money, you know, with selling these big grade 6 scores and all these things like that. And Betty Ludwig, Elizabeth Ludwig Fennell, Fred had convinced her and encouraged her to take a chance, to take some chances. And they were publishing some of the pieces that were winning the composition awards and things like that. And we wanted to recognize Betty Ludwig. So Betty Ludwig was getting the WAPA Award, and I was so proud. So I hosted her, and I'm sitting next to Betty and Fred, and we're there at the big general NBA meeting. I think it's, I don't know, was it yesterday? Is it going on today or whatever? In fact, I think it may be going on right now. So I'm sitting there, and right behind us, we had just had Frederick Fennell, the previous fall, on campus for a week. And he did a whole week, and that's a story in itself, that week that he spent with us. So I'm sitting there with Fred and Betty, and right behind us were a number of my graduate students, because in that seminar, I encouraged them about the importance of getting involved, finding out what the organizations are about. Do some networking. I mean, these people are human beings. Get around, be around them. And so about 5 grad students came and sat right behind us, and right in the row, right in back of us. And so anyway, they're kind of listening, and they're very careful, and I'm sort of visiting with Fred while this is going on the side, and Betty is there ready to get her award. And they just said, you know, something about, and we're going to, they recognize presidents. And our immediate past president, Mr. James Keene, and Fred puts his arm around me. And so these students, I guess, are in back, and they're leaning forward. They think they're going to get these words of wisdom. And Fred looks at me, and he would never call me Jim, he always said James. You know, James, there is nothing so useless as a past president. I thought I was going to get this wonderful congratulations and all of this. Well, some of those, I ran into one of those grad students earlier today, and he reminded me of that, unfortunately. I'm afraid I will never live that one down. So I guess that's your humorous anecdote, only because I was reminded of it earlier today.
Well, I don't know that I have anything really funny, but something unusual. When I was following John Green as director of Basketball in the state, and we had a number of what we thought were really good musicians and good people, and it has been interesting to see how they developed. One of those people that played in that band was Alan Murray. Another was Gene Corcoran. There was a percussionist who played in the group, who had a brother who played piano. And that was Richard and Karen Carpenter. And so there have been a number of really good, and then when my wife I got married decades ago, I called a friend of mine, Bernard Dillon, trumpet player, who you've all heard play trumpet. You don't know his name, but you've heard him play. He's played like in all John Williams movies. He's one of the studio guys. I said, can you get a brass quintet together for our wedding? He said, sure. So I won't go into the minor details, but he got a brass quintet, and he played first trumpet, the second trumpet, every trumpet player, who's the trumpet player? Okay, so you'll probably know somebody. The second trumpet player was Don Green. Don Green just retired as principal trumpet of the LA Philharmonic. He was playing second trumpet in my wedding brass quintet. Jeff Reynolds, who's my relation, just retired as bass trombone in the LA Philharmonic. And his brother played principal horn with Carl St. Clair in the Pacific Symphony. Larry Livingston was at that wedding and said it was the finest brass playing he'd ever heard on any occasion. So, maybe one more tweak of an interesting. I've now gotten back into something I've loved all my life. And I kind of let it slide, and I'm sorry. But the last month or so, I've gotten back, and I'm dedicated to this. I've gotten back into playing table tennis. So those people are from. So I go to the Farmington Hills Table Tennis Club, and there are 30+ players that play there, and I'm not quite the worst, but close. But I don't intend to be the worst. I used to be What can I take? Well, it was at Ken's house. It was after a Michigan State, Michigan football game. He had a ping pong table in the basement. He said, "You play ping pong?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, no, I'm in twice straight." No. I've been playing a lot. I've been playing in tournaments, and I was rated as a ping pong player. I played the U.S. Open at one point. So we played, and I did okay. So table tennis is my other passion. And while I'm not the worst, I am clearly the oldest in there.
I want to comment a little bit about what Jim and Bob told on Elizabeth Green. When you come to the state of Michigan and you want to judge in Michigan, you have to go to school. Now, believe it or not, I judged for a lot of years, and I still had to go to school when I became the director of bands at Michigan State University, because the Michigan School Band and Orchestra Association, MSBOA, requires it. The teacher was Elizabeth Green. And all I'm going to say is she's terrific, and I endorse what you heard about her, but don't forget, her books are still very, very important, and you can't read them too often to learn more from her. She's a magician, she really is. I was talking about Bill Ravelli, also brings back so many memories and that I have of him. I got to know Bill fairly well because when I was at the University of Kansas, he was our guest conductor out at KU, so I got to meet him often and be with him professionally and socially. One time, he was doing the Kansas All-State Band, and I was in charge of the band orchestra and chorus or something, in some way, shape, or form. I can't remember, but anyway, I was with Bill all the time, and I would pick him up in the morning and take him back at night and so forth and so on. And in the wisdom at KU, or the wisdom in Kansas at that time, was to start with, in the concert, start with the band, then have the chorus, and then do the orchestra at the end. Bill was doing the band, a man from Michigan, the chorus, he was a famous one, Maynard Klein. Maynard Klein was doing the chorus in the middle, and Thor Johnson was doing the orchestra at the end of this concert. Anyway, the groups were mediocre at best. And of course, Bill worked his magic with the band, and he started the concert. And I will never forget that concert because when that band started, it was like the New York Philharmonic. It was just fantastic. And the crowd at the end in Polk Auditorium at the University of Kansas campus erupted. It was before standing ovations were in vogue. And that crowd got up on their feet as fast as they could and started applauding. And then I'm sitting next to Bill in the audience, and he comes back after taking the vows. And he comes back to my chair and leans over to me and said, "Ken, that'll teach him to put me any place but last." And I can say it was anticlimactic from that point on, just because of what he said. I also want you to tell one more thing. We were supposed to be talking about the legends of the Big Ten, and when I got to be a Big Ten band director, I felt I had arrived, because in my life, being a band director in the Big Ten in that particular time in history was the ultimate. And when you get asked to be one, you have to take pride in it. I was really, frankly, not interested in leaving the University of Kansas. I had the perfect job, and I had been there 12 years, so I had been there long enough to do what I wanted to do, and I had a really good system there. And when Michigan State offered me the position, I turned them down 2 or 3 times. It started about in March, and finally in May, after May 1, and that's an important word, they called again, and so I consented to go down. And I did. I spent 24 hours there and told them what they didn't have that I had at KU, and that's the only way I would ever consider anything. Anyway, they came through with that kind of thing. But anyway, I followed 2 icons in the business. Leonard Falcone, who was there for 40 years, and Dr. Harry Beechin, who was there only 3 years, but one of the icons in our profession. And following those two was a little bit humbling, but I managed probably stumbling through, but here and there. But in the final analysis, when they offered me the position, I didn't know Leonard Falcone personally at all. I had never met him actually, except when I went out there for that one-day interview. But I did know Bill really well. So I called Bill on the phone and I told him that I'd been offered the position. And he immediately said, "Ken, you got to take that. That's a really good job." He was going on and on. I said, "Oh yeah, but I've got the perfect job, and I really want to stay at KU." "Oh, you can. You got to go. You got to come. This is a really good job." And we went through the repartee for a time or two, and then finally I said, "Well, Bill, there's one question I'd like to ask you." And he said, "Well, what is that, Ken?" And I said, "It's this. When are you going to retire?" And Bill told me, he said, "Well, Ken," he says, "this is my last year coming up." He said, "In 1970, I turned 70. And if you remember in the rules back in the dark ages there, once you turned 70, particularly at state universities, you had to retire. You couldn't go on. You were not permitted to sign another contract after you were 71, at least in all the universities I knew about." Anyway, when he told me that, I said, "Well, Bill, maybe I will take it then," because I told him, I says, when I want to recruit at Michigan, I want the very best students, and you want the very best students, and you're going to get them every time, because I'm a nobody here. And then he kept saying, "Well, Ken, there's a lot of good high school bands here, and there's enough to go around." And I said, "Yes, but there's only one number one in the recruiting business." But anyway, we went through the thing, and when he told me he was going to retire, I decided maybe I should give it a shot. And that's exactly what I did. But those mentors that they were talking about were also mine, too, obviously.
Okay. What were the important topics or concerns in the early days? Mr. Reynolds, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll answer that question, but there's something I want to say. I just have to give you my ultimate Ravello story. This is a real presence here. And I'm telling a story that he told in rehearsals frequently. And this is how it went. He was conducting an honor band, which he did a lot of. And the last two pieces on the concert were two of his favorites, Elsa's Procession and Stars and Stripes Forever. And he had the Stars and Stripes Forever first, and then ending with Elsa's Procession. And at the dress rehearsal, he said to the band, after Stars and Stripes Forever, we can't play Elsa's Procession. So we're just going to switch those two. We're going to play Elsa's Procession first, and then Stars and Stripes Forever to complete. So he did that. So he got up to conduct Elsa's Procession, and we went, crash! Cymbal player. Afterwards, we went to the cymbal player and said, "I understand if you didn't get the message that we switched, but what were you thinking when I was doing this?" He said, "The kid told me I was thinking, what a lousy conductor." That's his story. How has it changed? Maybe, and I thought about it, maybe the biggest change is it used to be that there was a director of bands and several assistants in the big time job, several assistants, and the director did everything with a lot of help, a lot of good help. So the director did the marching band and the concert band and all the administrative stuff and so forth, and that has gradually morphed into, and I think successfully, specialists. So the director of bands usually does not do the marching band. So there'll be a specialist in concert activity, whether it's Reynolds or concert band, doesn't make any difference. And then there'll be a specialist in the marching band who really dedicates themselves to doing that. There's been a change, but it was a gradual change of coming. I know I was vilified a lot when I went to Michigan because I put that in place. And they thought, Billy did the marching band, Cameron did the marching band, and now you're turning it over to somebody else. Like they're trying to say, well, this other person can do it better than I can. So, there was a time in the band history when we were almost consumed by a thing called standard instrumentation. Developing an instrumentation of how many oboes and how many clarinets and how many did you include a alto clarinet and a contrabass clarinet and so forth. And what turned out, those were the wrong questions. You sort of just let the composer decide that. And then you play the piece for what you have. Those are the two things that I have found have been severe changes. The one that's sort of natural, that wasn't a change, is that there have been an enormous number of really gifted band conductors who have entered the profession. The profession is now filled with really a lot of really talented people.
Bob touched on a lot of things which are terribly important, and certainly one of them is the specialization of the assistants. We take so much more care now in finding assistants and supporters in the program that are skilled in specializations of brass, woodwinds, percussion, etc. It's terribly important in our having a complete program. I'd like to address this opportunity from another point of view, and I'm addressing it from my point of view as the director of a school of music versus a director of bands. This is an important area. I have been dealing for 11 years actually, with the hierarchy of organization relative to the National Association of Schools of Music and the things that are going on with the accreditation of schools of music, and obviously bands are involved. I'm worried about one thing, and that is this. I covet the designation of a director of bands in each university relative to running let's say the band program, whatever you call it, wind ensemble, whatever. But I'm worried about the future because of this. There are a lot of places, and I'm a part of the NSM, I know this for a fact. There are a lot of schools that do not have directors of bands anymore. There's a lot of schools that have conductors of this ensemble or teachers of this class, and there's no one person who is in charge of guiding the philosophy of the band program as a whole. And I worry about it because there's a philosophy that I like to think the director of bands is best at, and I worry about it a little bit. The other thing is this, in this area. Band directors of bands are likely, more likely than others, to be better fundraisers than deans and directors of schools. Why are they interested in doing away with directors of bands? Because they can't raise funds like the director of band does. So you've got to be careful of eliminating the director of band's position. At least if I were running schools now, I would be very careful of that, because I want the directors of bands to have the power to do what they have done all their life better than most, is raising funds, getting money together. Because we need it, and when you are, as a director of bands, are out raising money from the dean or whoever is technically above you in the hierarchy, you could have a problem. So I'm hoping that the band world does not get moved into the form where there is no head honcho in the band program. And that's my feelings. I know I'm not, a lot of people don't agree with me, but that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, Bob was talking about specialization and how there are specialists in all of these areas. And, you know, I'm finding that there are specialties within the specialties. I live in a wonderful, wonderful state if you're interested in bands and band music. retired. We retired from the hill country north of San Antonio, Texas, and it's given me wonderful opportunities to do a lot of clinics and hopefully to make a difference with some great bands and great programs. But one of the things, for instance, when we start talking about specialization is quite often I'll be invited in to do a clinic and work with a group. I'll look back and I'll say, well, where's the percussion? Say, well, we don't bring the percussion in to the rehearsal until a couple of weeks before, 2 weeks before we go to contest, because, you know, in the fall, obviously, they're busy with the marching band activities. But we've got percussion ensemble, and we've got winter percussion ensemble, and where they do all of this stuff and do outdoor marching in the winter and then gyms and stuff. So we bring them in there, and they're marvelous. And when you get them finally, and it gets close to the festival, they're marvelous percussionists and things. But basically, you have to spend most of your time teaching them, or spending time getting them to be a part of the ensemble and understanding what is going on in the ensemble. So I think we've got specialists within specialists within specialists. You know, now in terms of the marching band, I'm not even sure the terminology is in the whole marching band director. Not only can I not make any attempt to do the kind of things that they're doing now, but I don't even recognize some of the language and some of the terminology. And they've got people, well, he's my visual guy, and he's my field coordinator, and he's my show coordinator, he's my this or that. And you've got a specialist, you know, this and that, you know, specialist for flags and guns and whips and chains and all and so, you know, I don't recognize that, but something was very disturbing. I liked it when I do come in from Midwest. One of the great pleasures and some of the most fun that I have isn't being here necessarily at the convention and all of this, but I have an opportunity to come in a few days early and go out to some of the suburbs and spend some time with former students and do that. And in fact, in the last couple of days, I've done 6 rehearsals and also with former students. And I was talking to a student the other day who was talking about the strengths and some of the things about the program. He's very concerned because he's been getting a difficult time from someone in his school, from a particular administrator in his school. And I said, well, you know, who is this that's giving you a bad time? And he said, well, it's the Dean of Student Activities. And I said, well, why are you dealing with the Dean of Student Activities? I mean, this is a curricular thing. This is an academic thing. Well, no, they've assigned our area to the student activities. So I said, so your evaluation doesn't come from the academic area. It comes from student activity. Well, yeah, that's the way we're assigned. And this particular Dean of Student Activities, as he or she is, was a former coach and stuff, and who basically told him that you are here for the marching band and for and this is a very fine concert band. You're here for the marching band, the athletic band activities, and everything else is filler to help these bands get better. So what he's doing with a very fine concert band is being perceived by the head of student activities. So I think it's something that I worry about. I hate to move us into a different area there, but that's one of the things that I've seen. One of the major changes is that somehow we've kind of allowed ourselves to be assigned, in many cases, to student activities.
Okay, thank you. Of course, we're running short of time, so I'm going to pull 2 questions into one. First of all, if you would, what do you think the future holds for our profession? And second would be, what piece of advice would you give to a young band director today? We'll start with Mr. Bloomquist.
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future of the bands, and I'm optimistic for 2 reasons. One, we have the talent in the musicians that we are privileged to work with is better than ever. I don't think there's any backlash in terms of how good they really are. And I think we've got literature now that is ours by the best composers, and I'm very excited about that. I wish I wasn't out of the loop so much so I could learn all those new things. But I've discovered all the old things I know are new to a whole bunch of people, so it doesn't bother me too much. The other part of the question, I think, was this: what can we do to what do we want to do to help? Is that right? Yeah, I think there's two things for me that I would like to share with you. One is never ever feel that you are prepared enough for doing a rehearsal. That rehearsal that you are preparing for in the very first read-through is the most important rehearsal you've got until the next one. So don't ever not be totally prepared to go to every single rehearsal, because you know what happens. The musicians in that ensemble know immediately that you are not prepared. You can't fool them. You just cannot fool them. So cover your hiding with getting totally prepared on whatever level you're at, whether it be elementary school or professional aspect, but do that. The other thing is this: don't lie. Be honest. If you lie, you're going to get caught, because it's something that you almost get used to, particularly at the college and university level, because you know what happens if you lie? You get sued, and that gets a little painful. So you've got to really be honest and sincere and just work your tail off.
Lifelong growth. I've already mentioned, Elizabeth Green as being a great example, and in terms of studying art. I remember calling over. We had Ravelli visiting one time. I believe it may have been when I was in East Texas, or may have been in Arizona. Anyway, I needed to talk to Ravelli. And at the band building at Michigan, the Ravelli band building, there was a secretary that had been there years and years that Bob had inherited. This is Mrs. Norris. And she told me that, that's right. And Mrs. Norris, I mean, they had a great term in Texas that covers a lot of things. She was salty. That's a great term, salty. Anyway, she says in her Tennessee or Mississippi or whatever the twang was, wherever it was from, she says, "Well, Dr. Belly isn't right here right now. He's out at the School of Music. He is taking a lesson with," there was a very fine Spanish violinist by the name of Angel Reyes. And she says, "He's taking a lesson right now from Angel Reyes." So anyway, I got a hold of Dr. Ravelli. He said, yeah. He says, "Well, I've been waiting for that for a long time." He says, "I wanted to pick his brain and know what he was thinking of with portamento cantando playing." And that's what they discussed. And I just thought that was a fabulous thing. And we talk about mentors, but and important mentors. There are mentors all around us. One of the most rewarding things about getting into the Big Ten is, boy, there were 9 other, or maybe 8 other schools and directors that we could learn so much from every time we came. There was a meeting, of course, the big meeting, the big breakfast was always Friday morning, and there was a breakfast in John Pater's suite and other places on Thursday morning where you get together, talk about, well, how are you setting up your curriculum? How are you doing your graduate program? How are you doing that? And so many mentors. And even before that, the importance of networking. I mentioned about telling the grad seminar the importance of networking. I can remember some things that were very important to my life, and when we talk about mentors, it's just not those major people that we had in college. There are a couple of people on either side of me that I still remember some very important things I got from them. Kenny, long before I came to the Big Ten, I remember one time we were stranded. It must have been 30, well, it's over 30 years ago. I was in Arizona, I think. We were stranded in O'Hare Airport, and the weather was bad. There was a thing in O'Hare called the Chicago Bar and Grill, and we were there eating those great big shrimps solving all the problems in the band world. That was one of the great 4 or 5 hours in my life. And I remember, you know, long before I was in Illinois or whatever, you know, trying to pick about Reynolds' brain, and he was so generous in that. And you gave me a gift that day in that you turned me on to a book by Bruno Walter called Music and Music Making. You even gave me the page number to turn to, and I bet you can remember the page number right now. Page 104. And that was very important. Little things like that was very, very important. And little things like that you can get from the people around you and from the network. And I think that's fabulous. In terms of the future and what we have now, I would agree with Ken in terms of things and bands performing music that's just was unimaginable, and especially where I live now in Texas. I mean, it's just some of the repertoire that they're doing. I mean, the university bands were having difficulty, and even the military bands. I mean, and there are high school bands now that are just playing some of the great repertoire at the very, very highest level, and that's really terrific. And I think one of the things that's fantastic about what we have now and what's going right now is, in the early days, there were some records. There was Mark Hinsley's Illinois band records. There was there was a few of the Eastman records that were out there. Ravelli had come back. They had come back from the Russian tour and done some recordings. But it was so difficult, especially for those people living out in the hinterlands, to get great musical examples and to hear great playing and to hear that sort of thing. And now, I mean, not only do we have these wonderful webcasts, we have everything that technology has given us. But in the old days, if there was a good piece, that came along, a fine composition that came along from an iconic composer, you might find out about it if you were fortunate. Perhaps you'd find out about it through word of mouth, through this, that, or the other, or somebody would send you a reel-to-reel tape. Maybe a year and a half, 2 years after the piece was composed, or maybe a year after the piece was composed. Now, what happens is a composer is commissioned, that they're able to do the piece, to put it on something like Sibelius, and get the parts. The parts don't have to be sent to a copyist. The parts are ready instantly. The composer emails the parts. The composer sends the parts electronically to the conductor. The conductor spends some time studying the score. In some cases, they may get the score in installments from some people. Spending some time studying the score, preparing it with the ensemble, and performing with that ensemble. The ensemble is cut to disc or is webcast or whatever, and in many cases, 6 to 8 weeks after a piece has been written, it is already out there available to the entire world, and that is amazing. Or you can hear recordings of the great artists. You don't have to send them out to Podunk, Rhode Island, someplace, and have them say, well, our kids don't have an opportunity to hear great playing. They have an opportunity to hear great playing. They have an opportunity to hear great playing on a daily basis. And we have an opportunity to get great music immediately, and great feedback, and be witnesses and listeners to great performances. So I think that's one of the great things that's happened in our day and age.
Thank you, and regrettably, we are out of time. I wish we had more time. But everyone, please help me thank these gentlemen.